My name is Anthony Doerr. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm a writer. I wrote most of my first book over at the library. I wasn't born here. I've only lived here 20 years, so I've had my library card for 20 years. Are there some other library card holders here who've had their cards longer than me? Yes, I love it. Anyway, the city has asked me to be the representative of the people for about 20 minutes and try to ask some of the questions that have been on message boards that people just pigeonhole me and ask about. And one thing I admire so much about your work, you've been doing this for 50 plus years, is that it seems to stand up over time, something I agonize on my own work quite a bit. You wonder, will this make any sense to a reader 20 years from now? I love when you're talking about the subfloor in Vancouver and how the internet really didn't exist when you're designing it. What challenges, what kinds of things, and thinking also in terms of parking, even autonomous cars, the kinds of things that will bring our grandkids to this library here in Boise, what kind of things are you thinking about, and how do you get your structures to stand up both physically and spiritually over decades, hopefully 100 years this library will be used?
The physically is easier than the spiritually. The physical is to really craft buildings well. In the vernacular, like 19th century, they had things evolved, masonry buildings, they had details, they repeated them, they knew how to keep the water out. I mean, then we got very adventurous and everybody was reinventing the wheel every time they did the building, hence the 60s building, they leak, they still leak. And had real technical problems. And, you know, somehow I became convinced, together with several other colleagues, that contemporary buildings need to be crafted in the same careful way so that you use durable materials and you detail it in a way that can take the wear and tear. And in institutional buildings, there's a lot of wear and tear. So you need to design it for that. But the spiritual part is tougher because life changes and more, you know, lifestyle changes, but also taste changes. And so anything that smacks of fashion has a short life. And, you know, when architecture is full of waves of fads, postmodernism, deconstructivism, and all these isms are short-lived. I mean, postmodernism, buildings that used to be on the cover of magazines, are sort of, you look at them and say, really? I mean, it's because they were about one-liner ideas. And so I think doing things that have deep meaning, and only for that reason, deep meaning, have a chance of having a long life and being timeless. And you have to test yourself all the time. Does that have real deep meaning? Are you not doing it to be capricious or to get the wow effect in spite of the library wow?
Absolutely, because it's the difference between somebody coming to a building because a star architect built it and returning to the building over and over because they have affection for being in the space.
And I think affection is the key word. I think buildings have to be beloved. And when they're not, you see that people are tough on them and rough on them. And you see graffiti on them, and you see just violence. I'm talking about public buildings. So I think it's a matter of essence and not falling into fads.
That's what I love about libraries. As a child or a teenager, when you take a book out, your parents are like, you have to treat that book with respect and return it. It's a way of educating yourself that this is community property and treating it well. Yeah. Something special about that. You talked about secrets of sites, and you mentioned the 3 trees. Talk to us about what secrets you've discovered, what you feel, what personally you feel connected to on the site. You've mentioned loving this particular site here in Boise a lot.
Well, the key thing about the site is the river. But you need to understand also its limitations and its promise. There's something beautiful about the flow of the water, the way the light sparkles on it, and the way it will change with seasons as it goes up and down. And I haven't seen it in all the conditions, but it's also very locked in by the vegetation. So you've got to kind of get in there to see it. And so I think the secret of this site is, in a way, if you want to really enjoy the water and the river and all that, you got to get in there. So the one thing that kind of fascinated me are those 3 trees, because one of them looks to me like 200 years old. And I think by positioning the building where we did, and this was a matter of feet, like thinking like how close can you get to them, you almost get the feeling in that room that I showed you in the rendering that you're in a tree house. When we'll make the models carefully, you'll be able to see that you're like in the tree house. And I think that's just an exciting feeling, you know? You're sitting up on a gallery, you're looking down on the water, and the tree is kind of, you're in the tree. And that's what this side, but the site has the north end, the north side of it, which is more challenging. Because right now we've got an industrial building where we're gonna maybe do the parking. It's an industrial building. It's opaque, there's nothing there. And so you got to build on what's going to happen around it. But to do that, you need to anticipate and make it encouraging for what happens around it. So on one hand, the traffic flows, the pedestrian traffic flows in, but then we try to give it a bit of autonomy. This little amphitheater planting area gives it closure, but still it's part of the street. And that'll be a tougher thing to program. I think we do need a couple of outlets there, food outlets or drinks, and not at winter, but in the transitional seasons, it's in shade.
Yeah,
so that's
cool.
a tougher space.
Yeah. I know there are a lot of people here thinking about this word. There's a word floating in their mind. The word is the cabin. And when you mention the site plan and you mention the proximity to the river, you mentioned the Anne Frank Memorial, but the cabin wasn't mentioned, and I can involve the mayor
asked me, so I didn't mention.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But I wondered
Yeah.
what you think of the site. It's an amazing literary center. The director is here. They do a lot of programming all over the city, but it is also on the site. They do work on the site. They do summer camps.
I'm an outsider, so I can speak as an outsider. In a way, I came and I saw this cabin. I think it's a charming cabin. I understand it's built in the early 40s. And it's getting good use, and there's a lot of affection for it. So you have to deal with it with respect. However, we are assigned to put a major public building, 100-year life, say, building, right on that site. So there's a tension, as there was with Anne Frank, but, you know, memorial. So there's a tension. And the question is, in the balance of things, how is best to deal with it? First of all, when we get our building built, it won't be the same for the cabin. Our building there will transform both the memorial and the cabin. I mean, the cabin sits there surrounded by trees, nobody's there, you're far away from anything. Now it's going to have a 7 or 6 story high equivalent, it's 4 floors, but tall floors, right over it, hovering over it. So it's not going to be that beautiful pastoral thing. You're going to feel like you're under the gun there. Somebody's watching you. So things are changing. Now, the question is what's best in the balance of things? How do you deal with that? I think that lifting that building, which is not a technical problem, and putting it on a similar beautiful site facing the river, this side or that side, will not take anything away from it, will probably be a better operation for those who are in it today than being under our construction, not to mention construction time while we're building. And the library will gain more openness to the river. So I think it's a win-win situation. And I mean, if this was, you know, a 6th century building in a 6th century district, let's say you can't move it, you can't touch it, but why not move it to a beautiful adjacent site and everybody wins? But that's an outsider speaking. I'm sure there's emotions about it.
Similar question I get asked about a lot. We are all grappling with change. I think those of us who have to drive our sons to a cross-country meet in the morning in Eagle are already planning, like, how many cars are going to be in my way? What is parking? What is the accessibility of this building in 20 years and 30 years? How do you even think about that stuff? You know, how do you imagine people entering this building 20 plus years from now, or 3 or 4 years when it's done?
So 15 years ago, I wrote a book called The City After the Automobile. And it was a misleading title because the premise of the book was we won't give up the car so easily. But what we might do is begin sharing the car in such a way that we don't need to take ownership. If we can pick up a car like we pick up a bicycle in many cities and drive it anywhere we want to and dispose of it and somebody else picks it up, you know, what could be sweeter? And that was before Zipcar and all. So it's happening, actually. That is happening. What I didn't imagine in my wildest imagination when I wrote that book was that we will probably be in our lifetime, certainly the lifetime of the younger people here, with driverless car. And driverless car is total revolution of what cities are all about. So, you know, if we had 4 hours, we could discuss that, but I don't know. It's going to change things drastically. Many of our projects right now, where we have to provide 4,000 parking spaces or 3,000 parking spaces, the question is there, how do you transform it to usable space when we have less cars?
Right.
And it's a valid question, because I think it's happening. It'll take, you know, more time, less time. So there's the immediate question. You can't make this work without parking, and we need it. And the long-term question is how fast will that diminish and how things will transform when other means are available for mobility.
Right.
And nobody knows the answer right
Right.
now, in my opinion.
What some folks may not know is some of your projects deal in such innovative ways with mega scale, these problems in China where a million people are moving to a city in a couple of years. You know,
Oh, it's amazing.
It's overwhelming. Yeah. Okay, one other question I hear a lot about is birds. You mentioned it briefly, but I think you have some really interesting ideas about ways to avoid bird strikes. Those of you who don't know, especially a building lit at night, lots of birds love to be drawn to glass for a number of different reasons. How do you think you can ameliorate that impact?
Well, we've been experimenting because we built an extension to our office with a nice glass wall, and one morning we found a dead bird right in front of it, so we realized we had an issue. Actually, in our case, we were advised to hang some three-dimensional birds on the glass, and actually that pretty well stopped it, but I'm not sure that's foolproof. There's other people are working on the problem because it's in the age of glass architecture, it's a big problem. There's now experiments which are on the market of sound waves that discourage birds from coming, kind of a sound, a sound you don't hear yourself, but that is discouraging to them, and we're looking into that. We certainly will have to deal with a site that's highly forested, and there's going to be birds there, and that large glass wall needs to be addressed.
Just a few more questions, and then we'll let you go. And I also want to remind everybody that there will be more open forums in the fall, plenty of other times where citizens will get to speak and participate in the design process. That lens wall, for those of us who have some windows in our homes that are south-facing here in Boise, know well that it gets incredibly hot in August. And I think a lot of people are wondering, like, what kind of burden on HVAC is that going to put? Like, how hot is that side of the library going
It'll
to
be
get?
hot if you let the sun in, because what does it is a radiant heat as it enters. You've got to stop the sun in the seasons which are hot outside. And you've got to do it in an effective way. And if you're clever about it, you will allow some sun on days, say, from now onwards towards winter, because you want that sun and you want to get the heat. So there's the whole series of devices. Some are static, like cantilevered sunshades that are designed with louvers with the right angle. But it's a large glass wall. It would need a lot of it. Some of it can be dynamic. You can have things extended when you need them and retract. I'm not sure which way we'll go here, but we have a great deal of experience in dealing with large, to just encourage the fact that we deal with it. The big glass wall in Salt Lake is south-facing.
Yeah.
There we solved it differently. We did a double wall, and the double wall is not occupied. So the heat gets trapped in between. It gets pumped into the heating reservoir of the building, so you can use that energy. And then by the time you come to the second glass wall, it's not a hot wall, and it doesn't come through. So the double glazing or double facades is another way of doing it. A little more expensive, but very effective. So we'll deal with it.
All right, one last major question. The site, I believe, anyway, Boise has this miraculous thing running under Warm Springs. It's in the Banner Bank building. That's geothermal. It's an amazing gift to an architect. Is there geothermal at the site? And what is your vision for, it may be more expensive, but what is your vision for the building being sustainable?
Oh, it has to be sustainable. That's no longer a choice. And we have brought on our team Atelier 10, who are London-based. They have a New York office with whom we've worked now on several very demanding projects. And the objective is to make it platinum, LEED's platinum. I mean, it's now an issue of responsibility. The big threshold between doing a gold building and a platinum building is that a platinum building, you need to invest in certain systems which will pay themselves in 5 or 6 years, but not instantly. Crystal Bridges was designed as geothermal, complete self-contained. It was a premium of $3 million, and it didn't happen. And even though a painting was bought that week for $38 million, so I mean, it's tough because there are budget pressures, and yet you want to be. So we will work together with everybody and try and do everything that's easy and passive, and also some of the energy collection, electric generation, all of these things. So it definitely would be a high level of sustainability.
Thank you so much, Moshe. Last question. You've done so much for so many cities. We're so grateful that you're even interested in our smaller project compared to some of your big projects. How can our library be cooler than the Vancouver and Salt Lake libraries?
Wow. Each building is cooler and cooler as we go along.
Right. Just keep
Wait
getting better.
a few years and it'll even be cooler.
Thank you so much, Moshe. Thank you all.
Thank you.